The man who ran the East Side numbers for 11 years signed over every asset he had, buildings, accounts, the 3 shell companies he thought were invisible, in a single afternoon, without a gun to his head. The person who made that happen was sitting in the corner of a conference room, wearing a cardigan, quietly finishing her coffee. Her name was Vera Morano, and nobody in that room had spoken a single word to her before that afternoon. That was exactly how she had planned it. Chicago's financial underworld has always had a simple taxonomy. There are the men who hold power openly, the men who hold it quietly, and the people those men hire to handle what they cannot understand. Dante Caruso belonged to the first category, though anyone who underestimated him for that reason did not make the mistake twice. He had built the Caruso organization from a single block in the near North Side into something that had fingers in real estate, logistics, and 3 layers of legitimate business that his attorneys were very proud of. He was 38, precise, and had a particular habit that his lieutenants found unnerving. He listened more than he spoke. Vera Morano came into the organization 8 months before the events in this story, hired as a financial analyst to audit the legitimate side of the books, clean up inefficiencies, flag discrepancies before quarterly review. She was 32, full-figured and unhurried in the way she moved through a room, with a solidity to her presence that most people in that building chose to overlook. She had a master's degree in forensic accounting from Northwestern and 4 years at the SEC before she left for reasons she kept to herself. She dressed in muted colors that made people's eyes slide past her without pausing. This was not an accident. She had understood something early, perhaps too early for her own comfort. The most dangerous position in any organization is the one that people cannot look away from. Visibility, she had learned, was a liability. So she had made herself into furniture, competent, reliable, invisible furniture. For 8 months she arrived early, left late, and did her work with a quiet thoroughness that her direct supervisor appreciated without ever feeling the need to mention upward. She asked no questions that weren't necessary. She offered no opinions that weren't solicited, and in those 8 months she had built a picture of the organization's finances so complete, so architecturally precise, that she could have reconstructed it from memory with a pencil and a legal pad. Nobody knew this. That was the point. What she had also built, without announcing it, was a map of something else, a pattern of transactions that didn't belong to the Caruso organization at all. A slow hemorrhage. Small enough to miss if you weren't looking, large enough in aggregate to matter enormously. The kind of thing that required either a spectacular carelessness or a deliberate hand. The hand belonged to Felix Greer. Felix was 44, head of the organization's external partnerships, the man who managed vendor relationships and the dozen legitimate businesses that provided cover and cash flow. He had come up from nothing, which was not unusual in this world. But he wore that origin like a wound that had never properly closed. He dressed expensively and spoke with the particular aggression of a man who has spent his whole life half expecting someone to notice that he doesn't belong. His cruelty was not theatrical. It was preemptive, aimed at anyone who might, if they looked closely enough, see through him. He had been siphoning money from the organization for 19 months, not greedily, carefully, the way a man does it when he has a plan and an exit, when he is not stupid enough to take too much too fast. He had 3 accounts in the Caymans and a contact in Toronto, and he was, as of the morning of the quarterly strategy meeting, 4 months away from disappearing entirely. He had not, in 8 months of working in the same building as Vera, learned her last name. What he had noticed was that she took up space he didn't think she deserved. A chair at the conference table, a slot in the meeting agenda, a folder she never seemed to open in front of anyone. He had the kind of mind that registers threats and disregards everything else, and everything about Vera told him, not a threat. She was quiet. She never argued, never pushed, never made herself known. In his taxonomy, she was background. He was, as a result, extremely comfortable around her. Nobody in that room had understood yet what that comfort was about to cost him. The quarterly strategy meeting was held on the 14th floor of a building that officially belonged to a property management company. 12 people around the table, Dante at the head, Felix to his right, Vera at the far end near the window with her coffee and her closed folder. The agenda was routine: revenue projections, partnership renewals, a logistics contract that needed renegotiation. 40 minutes in, Felix was presenting the partnership numbers. He was good at this. Confident, specific, moving through the data with the ease of a man who had rehearsed carefully. He was in the middle of a projected growth figure when one of the other executives, Marco, asked about the Kellner account, a mid-size distribution partnership that had been underperforming for 2 quarters. Felix didn't have an immediate answer. He shuffled papers, bought time, threw out a number that Marco questioned. The room waited. And then, from the far end of the table, Vera said quietly, "The Kellner shortfall is 340,000 over 2 quarters. It's in the supplemental analysis I sent Thursday." The room turned toward her. Felix turned toward her. And something shifted in his face, not surprise exactly, but the specific expression of a man who has been minding his own garden and suddenly noticed a weed with an opinion. "Did anyone ask you?" he said. His voice was pleasant. That was the most precise part of it, the pleasantness. "The numbers are in the file," Vera said. "The numbers," Felix repeated, from the quiet girl in the corner. He smiled at the table generally, the smile that invites shared amusement. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I think we can afford to hear from the adults first." He paused, and the pause was surgical. "Though I suppose when you've been stuck in the corner long enough, you start imagining your voice carries further than it does." 2 people at the table laughed, quickly, uncomfortably, the kind of laughter that is mostly about not being the target. The others looked at their papers or at the wall. Vera did not move. She took a slow sip of her coffee. She set the cup down with the same unhurried precision she used for everything. She met Felix's gaze for exactly 1 moment, not a challenge, not submission, just a look that catalogued him completely. And then she returned her attention to her folder. She did not leave. She did not explain herself. She did not look hurt. Dante, at the head of the table, said nothing. He had gone very still. He was watching Vera's hands, which were perfectly calm, and he was thinking something he would not articulate for another 2 hours. Psychologists call it contempt, and John Gottman, after 4 decades studying human interaction, identified it as the single most corrosive force in any dynamic between people. Unlike anger, which communicates frustration, contempt communicates something colder, that the other person is beneath consideration entirely. What makes it distinct, Gottman found, is that it isn't reactive. It is deliberate. It is designed not to wound, but to erase. Vera already knew this. She also knew it was the most significant mistake Felix Greer had made in 19 months. The meeting continued. Her folder stayed closed. After the meeting, in the elevator, Marco fell into step beside Dante and said something low about Felix's numbers, not quite adding up in the 3rd quarter. Dante said nothing. He was still thinking about the hands. He went to his office and did something he had not done since Vera joined the organization. He pulled her personnel file. Masters in Forensic Accounting. 4 years at the SEC. Reason for departure listed as personal. He stared at the SEC entry for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and dialed her extension. "The Kellner file," he said when she answered. "The supplemental analysis. I'd like to see it." "I'll bring it up," she said, in the same even tone she used for everything. She arrived 7 minutes later with a folder. Not the closed one from the meeting, a different one, considerably thicker. In 20 minutes, everything Felix Greer had spent 19 months building would begin to come apart. She sat across from Dante without being asked and opened the folder without preamble. She walked him through the Kellner numbers in 4 minutes. Then she paused. "There's something else," she said. He looked at her. "I'd like to show you something I've been working on separately, if you have 20 minutes. He had 20 minutes. She opened the second section, 19 months of transactions, laid out in a structure so clean it looked almost architectural. 7 accounts, 3 in the Caymans, routed through a legitimate vendor network that Felix managed directly. She had traced every thread. She had documentation at every junction. She had calculated, based on the withdrawal pattern, that the exit window was approximately 4 months out. She had identified the Toronto contact by method, if not by name, enough to make him irrelevant. She set it on the desk and folded her hands. Dante sat with it for a long time. "How long have you had this?" he said. "Confirmed 3 weeks, suspected 5 months. Why didn't you bring it sooner?" "I needed to be certain," she said. "And I needed to make sure there was no secondary exposure I hadn't fully mapped." A beat. "There isn't." He leaned back in his chair. He looked at her the way you look at a thing you realize you have been looking at completely wrong. "You said nothing at that meeting," he said. "After what he did to you." "I said what needed saying," Vera replied. "The Kellner number was wrong. I corrected it. Everything else in that room was not relevant to the meeting." He was quiet for a moment. "You weren't going to tell me about this unless I asked." "I was going to tell you," she said. "I was waiting for the right moment. Today, qualified. There are people, rare ones, who understand that the performance of capability is not the same as capability itself. For 8 months she had been building a case that would make it impossible for anyone to overlook her. And she had done it in complete silence, in a cardigan with a cup of coffee, in the far corner of a room where no one spoke to her. Dante had spent 20 years learning to read rooms. He was now understanding that he had missed an entire room. What happened next would take Felix Greer apart so methodically it would look from the outside like gravity. Felix was called into Dante's office the following Thursday. He arrived with his usual confidence, the slight forward lean, the expensive watch, the handshake that lasted exactly 1 second longer than necessary. He expected a conversation about the Kellner account. He was ready for that conversation. He had a story prepared. He found Vera sitting at the conference table in Dante's office. He found 3 folders on the table. He found Dante standing at the window with his back to the room. Felix looked at Vera. She looked back at him with the same calm she had carried through the meeting, unhurried, complete, requiring nothing from him. "Sit down, Felix," Dante said without turning around. Felix sat. "I'd like Vera to walk you through something," Dante said. Vera opened the first folder. She began with the Cayman accounts, specific numbers, specific dates, specific routing identifiers. She was precise and quiet, and entirely without drama. She laid out 19 months of his work in 11 minutes. She identified the vendor accounts he had used as cover. She showed the withdrawal pattern and the projected exit timeline. She presented documentation of his Toronto arrangement, not a name, but enough. Felix moved through the stages in sequence. Denial. He started to speak twice and stopped both times. Comprehension. His face settled into something flat and very still, a blankness that was not calm, but the thing that comes just before it. And then the one that was most interesting to observe. Calculation. He was looking for the angle he hadn't considered. He was examining the room for any remaining exit. He looked at Vera. She could see him deciding that she was the variable, that there might still be something to work with there. "I'd like to speak to Dante alone," he said. "Vera stays," Dante said, still at the window. Felix's jaw shifted. "She's an analyst. This conversation—" "She built the entire case," Dante said. He turned around then and crossed to the table slowly and stood. "She traced 19 months of your work without a single word to anyone. She sat in that meeting while you talked over her, and then she handed me your exit date." He looked at Felix the way you look at something you are preparing to finish. "So you'll have this conversation with her in the room, or you won't have it at all." The 3 shell companies were transferred that afternoon. The Cayman accounts were frozen through channels Felix's attorney could not navigate. The Toronto contact received a single call that made the arrangement irrelevant. Felix was walked out of the building with his personal items in a cardboard box, and the door closed behind him with a sound that was, by design, not dramatic at all. He had spent 19 months building an exit. Vera had closed it in 11 minutes. That evening, Dante found her still at her desk, finishing something on her laptop. He set a glass of water beside her without asking, and sat across from her. "You could have brought that to me in month 5, he said. "I could have," she agreed. "Why didn't you?" She looked up. "Because in month 5 I had a case. In month 8 I had a case with no gaps and no secondary exposure." She paused. "And I needed to be sure the vendor accounts wouldn't move if he was spooked early." He was quiet for a moment. 8 months in the corner of that room. "It's a good corner," Vera said. "Good sightlines." He almost smiled. It was a very specific, almost smile. The kind that means something has shifted in a direction that will not shift back. What Solomon Asch identified in his foundational research on impression formation is that we build our understanding of a person around an early central trait, a key quality that colors everything else we subsequently observe. The power of that initial frame, Asch showed, is so strong that contradicting it doesn't simply update our view. It reverses it entirely, with a force proportional to how wrong the original frame was. To discover in a single afternoon that the furniture was a strategist all along, that doesn't just revise a first impression. It makes the person who held that impression feel, quietly and permanently, that they were the one who wasn't paying attention. Dante had been paying attention for 20 years. This was the first time he had missed something this significant. "I want you in the room," he said. "Not the corner, the room." Vera closed her laptop. "Define the room," he told her. It was not a corner. She thought about it. Then she nodded once, the same unhurried final nod she used for everything, and said, "I'll need access to the external partnership accounts." "You'll have it by morning," Dante said. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She paused there, not dramatically, just because something occurred to her. "Felix," she said without turning around. "He thought the corner was where I was being kept." She glanced back once. "It's where I was working." She left. Dante stood in the empty office and looked at the door. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in October. Cold without apology, indifferent to the things that happen inside its buildings. He thought about a meeting 2 weeks ago, about a woman finishing her coffee while a room looked past her, and about what a catastrophic error it is to assume that silence means absence. The next morning, the chair at the far corner of the 14th floor conference table was replaced by one at the head. There is something in this story that cuts deeper than a mafia romance. The particular exhaustion of being dismissed by people who haven't bothered to look. If that landed somewhere in you, like tells the algorithm this kind of storytelling is worth finding. And if you haven't subscribed yet, the next story is about a woman who walked into a negotiation that wasn't designed to have a winner, and walked out with the terms she wrote herself.